Thank you.
Halfway through the lesson, I get cute. It starts getting warm. Test, test, test. All right. Welcome to this evening's Bible study. We're going to be going through and continuing in the book of John. And last week, both Sunday and Wednesday and Sunday, we finished up John 6. We're going to be getting John 7, at least half of it, 1 through 24. And then Jed will pick up the second half and on Sunday for us. So we're going to continue the theme that the Apostle John has been working through. And it's interesting because he is staying right on target. And he's using many of these different events that Jesus went through and signs to be able to show both belief, unbelief, and true belief is what he's going to be going through. And we're going to see that again here, where he's going to hit all three of those areas when he recounts the different things that Jesus was doing during this time frame. But before we go there, let's go to our Father in a word of prayer. God, our Father in heaven, we are so thankful that we have the ability to come and study your word, to be able to look at it closely, to be able to truly understand and work towards understanding what you have in store for us, what you are teaching us, and how we should act from some of the different scenes, the different events that occurred, the disciples of the past as well as the unbelievers of the past, and how it was reacted to and what we should do. We pray, God, that we'll be able to focus upon that and more so apply it to our lives to be able to be a better Christian, to be able to be closer to you, to love you more, to be able to walk in a manner that's pleasing to you and to be examples for others. We are so thankful that we have the group here to be able to study together, to learn together. We pray, God, that we'll be able to do that. We are thankful for your Son, Jesus, as we open up the book of truth, see what he has done in our study tonight, and be able to apply that. And we are so thankful for him, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen. So kind of a quick recap on, let's see if I should open up my Bible for a second. In chapter 6, that was the story of the feeding of the 5,000, but it was a great example and an area where Jesus could tell and show a sign. And what was that sign that he was showing us in the feeding of the 5,000? Was it just to get people out to quench their hunger? No. What was it?
He multiplied the food.
What's that?
He multiplied the food.
Multiply the food. Okay, so what did he do with that? What was that sign in there? Was it just for hunger? No. It was a spiritual area. He was trying to show that he is here not to feed them food, which that's what they were looking for. That's what they thought. That's what they believed. But he was there for a continuous quenching of a spiritual nature. And we also saw that with the woman at the well, as John also talked about as he went through. Then we also saw in the same chapter where he walked on water. What was the situation there? What was he showing them?
He has the power of the elements.
He has the power of the elements, and also, he was also showing the example of they followed him. Why? Because they wanted more signs. They wanted more of what he could give. Curiosity, yeah, I'm sure it was curious, but they didn't. They believed that there was something going on, but did they believe that he was the true Savior, the Messiah, who was going to be able to continually work through, and they followed him for that? Is that what the reason they did it?
He said so.
That's right. He says no. He said no. And that was one of the things that he showed them, that he showed them who was the bread of life, which was him. He was the bread of life, and that's what they didn't want to go. And then as we got to the end, there was a pretty stark example of his disciples once he started talking about and explaining what the bread of life was and how they had to ingest it and ingest his blood. What was their reaction to all that? disciples left him, right? And that really sets us up for this next scene. And I'll read from 66 on through 71 in chapter 6, and it reads, "After many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him, so Jesus went and said to the 12, 'Do you want to go away as well?' Simon Peter answered, 'Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we believe, and we have come to know that you are the Holy One.'" Good answer. Very good answer. And Jesus said to him, "Did I not choose you, the 12, and yet one of you is a devil?" He spoke of Judas, the son of Simon, for he was one of the 12 who was going to betray him. So we can see that, yeah, some of his disciples and his apostles, they definitely were following him for the right reason. He showed that belief was there. But many of them didn't, because they couldn't accept what he was telling them. So we're going to go into chapter 7 here, where it is titled in my Bible, Jesus at the Feast of the Booths. Let's kind of set the scene a little bit for what the setting of the scene that this is in regard to the Feast of the Booths. What is the Feast of the Booths? And it's also known as the Tabernacle, right?
It's harvest time.
It's what?
Yeah, harvest time.
Harvest time. So it's a specifically timed event that who was supposed to go? Male Jews. The male Jews were supposed to go on a pilgrimage, basically, if they were around that area, to where? Jerusalem, right? And what was the event for? Okay, it was because of the festival, and that's why. But they also call it Feast of the Booths. Why is it the Booths?
It's to remind them of the time that they dwelled in booths when they came out of Egypt.
Right, which is another word for tents, basically. A temporary shelter is what they had. So this event was set up so that they will remember this temporary shelter that they had for how long?
7 years.
No. How long did they have in the temporary shelters?
Oh,
40
40
years,
years.
right? Okay, so this was set up in what? Leviticus, right? Leviticus what?
23, 33.
23, yeah, 23 and 33. It was all laid out what they were supposed to do. So all of the males would go towards Jerusalem, and they would set up tents for 8 days. Why was it 8 days?
It would be the Sabbath.
Exactly. It was actually 7 days. The first day they went there, it was the Sabbath. They rested, and then they had 7 days that they were there to do their specific events that they did. And one of the specific thing that they were supposed to remember was two things. Two things came out of this in Leviticus. It talks about it. I think Deuteronomy as well. We already talked about the first one, was to remember the temporary shelter they had. God wanted them not to forget that. And the other one was the coming of the Messiah, right? That's what they were there to do. Why does God want us to remember something like that, or them in that situation? Why was it important to them? Just to get them together? You know, kind of pull them all together and do this?
Remember, being brought out of slavery, wanting out of Egypt, and to keep them humble.
Keep them humble, to keep them understanding that God was in control. I think that there might have been another reason for that, specifically in regards to that recalling them wandering around in the wilderness, and also understanding that they had a Messiah, a messianic expectation that they come to see.
Well, verse 43 of Leviticus 23 tells you why.
Go ahead.
It says that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So Moses declared to the children of Israel the feast of the Lord.
What does that mean to us, though? I mean, what does that mean to
They're
them?
dependent upon God.
Dependent
God
upon
is
them.
Their
You know,
deliverer and provider.
You know, one of the things that reminds me of is that you know that it also tells them that things are temporary too. I mean, they're in temporary booths, right? these temporary areas. This life is not here. As God moves them through, these aren't as important to you. They got to remember that. So what they would do is when I was reading through some of the commentaries, is the tents or the temporary areas, in a lot of cases, they had flat roofs of their houses. They would go up there and they would stay there for a particular amount of time. Now, with all the areas going, all the people going there, you would think that Jesus was going to have to be there too as well. Let's read this and kind of see as we dissect the area. Can I get a reader from verse 1 through verse 5?
I'll take care. And after these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judea because the Jews sought to kill him. Now the Jews, the feast of the tabernacles was at hand. His brothers therefore said to him, Depart from here and go to Judea, that your disciples may also see the works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. Even his brothers did not believe in him. Then Jesus said to them, My time is not yet come, but your hour is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I identify of it, and its works are evil. You go up to the feast, and I am not. Anyway, I wouldn't go before them.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We just wanted to go through 5. Okay, so let's take a look at the first verse. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee, where he would not go to Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Okay, so why was Jesus avoiding that? Is he afraid? Timing wasn't right. We're going to see that specifically as you read that. So Jesus was avoiding Judea because of the hostilities. And what caused those hostilities? We saw that back in the last chapter, didn't we? What was it?
Because they didn't understand what he was talking about as eating his flesh and blood.
Yes, and he healed on the Sabbath because he also identified himself as God as well. And we're going to see that a little bit more where he identifies back to that exact point, he said. And yes, they did, there was some that believed in him, but they didn't believe Jesus. And we're going to see here, do they believe that Jesus is the Son of God at this point? No. We're going to see that as we go through. Okay, so we have an explanation why Jesus is avoiding Judah because of those hostilities, and also those Jewish leaders specifically were trying to escalate this whole area. And we also saw that back in John 5 and 18, where they were trying to escalate his area. So what can we do to understand this as an application? And somebody said that right here. In fact, Ken said it. Whose time do we go by? Do we go by our own time? No. We go by God's time. God is in control of the time, and Jesus knew that as well. His time was absolutely he was in line, in lockstep with absolutely what the timing was supposed to be. A lot of times we think that our own wisdom and our own time, we run by that clock. We can't do that. In verse 2, and it says, Now the Jews' Feast of Booths was on hand. Okay, so we did talk about the Feast of the Booths, recalling their wilderness journey, and to be able to recall that. One of the things that was interesting here is that, the Jews were at the Feast of the Booth was at hand. And we're going to see here in verse 3 and 4. So his brothers said to him, Leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you're doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. So what were his brothers urging him to do? And we're talking about the brothers. Now this isn't like the brothers in disciples. This was who? His half brothers. Absolutely, it's his half brothers that were there with him, younger brothers, of course. So they were with him, and they immediately come out and said, "Hey, it actually is a great idea. You think about it, right? If you're sitting there thinking, okay, now they're waiting for who? The Jews are waiting for who? The Messiah to come. What better shot is it to sit here and say, yeah, look, here is the Messiah. Let's come in triumphant and show them who you are."
Wasn't there a little bit of sibling rivalry too, I think?
Seems like something's going on here. Because we're going to see a little bit later in the next verse. But his brothers were urging him to put on this display, basically of who he was. Himself as a public triumph to come in, a chance for publicity. In Matthew 12 and 46, Jesus, it says there where Jesus' family did not initially understand his mission at the time as well. So we kind of know that there's still some doubt and some misunderstanding. It's almost like today, right? A lot of times people want to be able to sit there and say, we want to be able to prove Jesus is in terms of God by just wanting him to go and come down here and show us. Come down here and show us. Not his time. He understands that. He's kind of slow rolling this whole situation as well. So in verse 5, this was very interesting. He says, for not even his brothers believed him. Why do you think they threw that one in there? That's a staggering statement. You would think that, what would you think? Growing up with Jesus as a brother, half-brother, Mary, you think that Mary never talked to the brothers of the family about the whole situation of Jesus? I don't know. It doesn't specifically say, but you would think that they would understand and know his purpose and his role. But for some reason, even they didn't.
Well, it's a relationship thing. I have a friend that sells, gap insurance for Medicare, and her mother needed that, and she said, "Well, that's what I do for a living. Let me tell you what to do." She wouldn't listen to her. She said, "I do this for a living." She said, "No, I'll talk to somebody else." And that's just the way family is. They just seem like anybody related to doesn't know what they're talking about.
This was also prophecy because in Psalms 69 and verse 8, it says, I have become a stranger to my brothers. So he even was prophesying that he would become a stranger to his own brothers at that point.
And a prophet's not without honor in his own country, right?
A lot of times too, I guess if we were trying to make the application to, how this is for now, like you just did, an application, proximity doesn't always mean that it's going to be able to have that same knowledge and faith, right? I guess that would be, and a lot of times we think that just coming to church, just being with saints is going to automatically let us understand the gravity of our salvation. I mean, it helps, but what does it take more than? I mean, these guys were in proximity the entire time, and they still did not believe.
Well, sometimes we say somebody's having a challenge, and we think, well, some relative would be the best one to go talk to them. Sometimes that's the worst person to talk to.
Yeah.
Because the relationship's too close. You need somebody more objective, more distant. But that's what we usually do. We think, well, the relative or the close relative, or brother or sister or mother or daughter, they would be the best ones to influence them, and that's usually just the opposite.
One of the things that's absolutely right, Ken. Yeah, I believe that 100%, and that could be the situation. But it's interesting that the proximity of Jesus didn't help him any. And also, one of the things that the brothers wanted, and it may have been out of just spite, saying, if you are the Messiah, why don't you just go on in there and be able to be, self-glorification. You are it. Let's go in there and glorify yourself. Don't wait. Well, Jesus had a time limit, and self-glorification isn't always just a evidence of belief or unbelief. Go ahead, Sam.
I'm trying to say, hey, if you really are this person, or to the extent, prove it to everybody. Don't go hiding. Go prove it to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't understand God's plan. Jesus knew what his Father's plan was.
Yeah. And they actually didn't believe him. We saw that in the verse. So they're just almost like baiting him on. Well, go ahead. If you're the Messiah, go show him. Go do it.
Well, in the temptation of Christ, 40 days after the voice out of heaven said, "This is my beloved Son," and then 40 days later, the devil says, "If you're," he questions, "if you're the Son of God, prove it." make these stones into bread. And then it's, if you're the Son of God, will raise up and down off the temple. If you're, so even at that time, he had to prove him. He was asked to prove himself, and he didn't do it. He wasn't going to do it. The devil said.
Because the time was not right.
Well, it was also it was written he wasn't supposed to be doing those things.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And that I was thinking about that as well, that same example. When he doesn't have to glorify himself by proving anything in that regard. For belief to happen, that's not what is required in this situation here. So in verse 6 through 7, let's take a look at that now. And Jesus said to them, which is the brothers, "My time has not come yet, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about that, because I testify about it, that its works are evil." I'm sorry. That's an interesting statement. I had to read that over and over again. In fact, I just did read it over and over. Still couldn't get it right. But what does that mean? It's complicated in my opinion, but I think I understand it. What do you guys think? Okay, first of all, his time is not right yet. Okay, we understood that. But your time is always here. That's interesting. I think he kind of explains it a little bit more when he talks about the next sentence, where the world cannot hate you, but it hates me. Why does it hate me? Me being Jesus. Why?
Because he exposes their evil.
Because he exposes their evil. So what were these guys, the brothers, not doing? They weren't exposing the evil of the world.
Well, they're making life easy for them, not
Yes.
making it wait.
Exactly. Did you hear that? Making it easy. I mean, there's a lot of application there for me, right? And that's one of the areas that these folks, we're seeing here. And it's interesting the way he puts it there. The world cannot hate you, but it does hate me because I testify that its works are evil. So Jesus is testifying that its works are evil, and the world is going to hate him for that. That was one of the tests that we've seen before. How does the world? And it doesn't mean you go out there and you try to antagonize, over and over again. But you have to be able to stand for something. You have to be able to be called out. We talked about that in chapter 3, I think it is, where you have a transformation when you're called out. It's different. You have to be able to change. You have to be able to not be with the world. We're in the world, but we don't have to be with the world. And that's kind of the situation, at least what I'm taking out of this, is that, if the world is always in love with us, then maybe there's a problem there.
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, go ahead.
Later in John 15:19, maybe this helps to explain it. It says, "If you were of the world would love his own. But because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world thereof, therefore the world hated you."
Exactly. That was one of my cross references as well. 2 Timothy 3:12 says very, very similar to that whole situation there, where his brothers, they were of the world, and Jesus quickly says, "Well, you guys can go do what you want. It's no big deal. You can walk right in there, and they're not even going to bother you." He walks right in there, and what are they going to do? They're going to kill him, and he knows that. He's not afraid of it because he knows they're going to do it anyway, but his time is not right. You think his brothers caught on to that when he told them that? I don't know. It's interesting. But if the world loves us, then there may be a problem, and apparently there was a little bit of problem with his brothers, and Jesus understood that right off the bat. Any other comments on that before we move on? All right. In verse 8, it says, "You go up to the feast. I am not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet come." Wait a second. I just thought that they were all supposed to go to the feast. Is Jesus not telling the whole story? What do you think that is all about?
Well, he Probably. He knew that his brothers would expose him when they got there. If he went with them, they'd, bring this up again, who he is.
Yeah, Miss Ann's all over it. What she was saying is that when the brothers were going up there, they were going to go in what way? A very public way. They wanted him to come all on up and be able to show that he's the Messiah, come marching in and show some miracles, some other areas, and show them that. But Jesus says, no. He says, you go to the feast, which you go to the feast in your way. And I think there was some of the other versions, at least that's what I read in some commentaries, I didn't check this, where it says, that I am not going up. And I think that there was other versions, or at least adds to some of the context. Does anybody have that in their Bibles?
Mine says, I am not yet going.
Yes, that's it right there. I am not yet going up there. Some of the versions say I am not. But what he's talking about is in that public the matter. And again, he talks to about, he says, for my time has not yet come. My time for what?
To offer himself up.
To offer himself up, because he knows he's going to die, and he knows he's going to have a situation that he's not ready to meet. He hasn't came to that level. Everything is set like a plan. Right? Go ahead.
Fulfilled a plan.
Yes. All right. So Jesus, he goes up. He says that. Let's see. Yeah, as Glenn was saying right there in Galatians 4:4, Jesus' life unfolds in a divine time. Everything is set for a divine time, and he understood that. Faith waits on God's timing, not the human pressure. He didn't fall into that human pressure area. Very similar to like Satan did when he tested him. In verse 11, verse 10 through 11, it says, but after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went. Not publicly, but privately. The Jews were looking for him at the festival, saying, where is he? All right, so we see how he enters. He enters very quietly. He enters in a subdued area. Does that mean he's just going to go in there and just sneak around? No. Jesus has a plan. He's going to be able to go in there and he's going to be able to make his points known as he needs to. So he enters quietly, avoiding that premature confrontation that we talked about that would unfold. And meanwhile, what were the people doing? They were searching for him. Oh, is that you, Mike?
No.
Knock it off. Respectfully.
Getting close back here, so.
What did you say? They were looking for him. They were looking for Jesus. Why were they looking for Jesus? Because they were looking for the Messiah? No, they weren't looking for the Messiah. How do we know that? It'd be joyful for one, but they were looking for him because they thought that Jesus was what?
Leading the people astray.
Leading the people astray and claiming that he was also God in the flesh. And also doing, as somebody said here, work on the Sabbath. And we're going to get to that point here in a little bit too. And there was much muttering about him among the people. While some said, he's a good man. Others said, no, he's leading people astray. Yet, for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of it. I wonder why that is. For fear of the Jews, for fear of who? For maybe the leaders? Opinions were divided. We can see that right now. Some were more or less just thinking that he was a good man. Well, yeah, he's a good man, but nobody was saying that he was the Messiah.
There's a book called something about evidences, and it's written by Josh McGalley. He's written 2 books. In the first one, he talks about, he says, Jesus is either one of 3 things. He is the Lord, who he says he was, or he's a liar, or he's a lunatic.
Mm-hmm.
Lord, liar, or lunatic. And that's what they're saying here. He's either deceiving the people, he's a liar, but they never really confessed that he is who he said he was.
Well, even if they thought he was the Christ, the Messiah, were they confessing him openly? What are we supposed to do? I mean, we are supposed to confess him openly, as Matthew 10, verse 32. It It's not supposed to be secretly. We aren't supposed to hide in shame. That would be a sin. So the application here, the fear of man, what does it do? It silences many. The fear of man silences many. And that can happen today with us, as well. We have to be able to understand that that is a real challenge. So let's move into the other scene that it changes into here, where there's really evidence of real true belief as well when we're seeking the Father. We're looking through 14 through 18. And in verse 14, in the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. Well, finally, Jesus gets up there and he says, okay, I am going to teach. Now, this was in the middle of the festival. This was probably, as I was reading, like on a Wednesday, the third day or fourth day in there, where Jesus went up and he started going into the area. So at that point, he starts teaching openly, right in the heart of Israel, in the religious circles. And we can see that God's truth is not going to be hidden, and Jesus is not going to hide that truth as well. And it was his appointed time to do that at that point, else he wouldn't have did that. So he confronts everybody, and here it reads in 15, the Jews therefore marveled, saying, how is it this man has learning when he has never studied? So what are they thinking here? Right away, they don't even understand he's still the Messiah, right? Go ahead, Glenn.
Mesmerized by him being so knowledgeable about what he's talking about without even knowingly studied on it.
So what do we think? I mean, how do we apply that to us? A lot of times we sit there and want to know, what kind of degree do you have, right? Before we want to know what school you went to, who taught you this? That's what we're always looking for as man. What is Jesus looking for? No, he's not looking for any of that. In fact, who does he pick as his apostles and disciples? In most cases, fishermen.
The least of
The least of.
Okay, when he was 12 years old, he was in the temple talking to the leaders of the religious world, and they were amazed at even then.
Yeah.
And he said, I must be about my brother's business. Well, he said the same thing, basically, that my testimony, my doctrine's not mine, it's him who sent me.
Exactly. That's the next section. Go ahead.
My father-in-law said in a sermon one time, the gospel is a perfect message, but does not require a perfect messenger.
Yes.
And sometimes we often look to be or look to hear from the perfect messenger. So sometimes criticisms fall short because even though they're valid criticisms, right? We say, well, what about the log in your eye? Well, wait. Those criticisms might still be valid even though everybody's got the log in their eye. That's the point of that.
Right.
And I think sometimes we make those quick, hasty judgments on people when we hear those criticisms.
And that's some of the what allows me, a lot of times to get in the pulpit, because it's not my authority that I'm talking about. It should be God's authority, right? And how much more bold can you be able to speak if it's God's authority? And this is what he says in the next area. So Jesus answered them, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. Even Jesus is humbling himself to this situation. So what does that point us to do? True ministry and true dividing and teaching of the gospel points away from ourselves. It has to be. It has to point to who? The Father. Right? Absolutely. You're absolutely right in that statement. Verse 17. If anyone's will is to do the Father's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking from my own authority. What do you think of that?
He puts it back on them.
Yes,
If
he
you're
does.
doing, or if you have read the old law and what the prophets wrote down, and if you know all of that, then you know who I am.
And that's when he starts in with verse 19. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keep the law. Who do you seek to kill me? Why do you seek to kill me? So what is he talking back there? He's pointing back to what situation? Back in chapter 6, right? Remember what happened there? Why were they looking to kill Jesus when he was going there? Because the situation here about working on the Sabbath. So what about then Moses, given the law? What would happen, and I think that some of the examples that they were given was circumcision, right? What was the law about in circumcision? What if the circumcision requires, I think, 8 days, is that it? 8 days from the time of birth. What happens if it hits on the Sabbath?
You do.
You do it. Isn't that what Moses said? So these guys, what Jesus says, he folds it right back on them and says, look, you guys, what are you doing? You're not even following Moses' law when you're talking about this. Hasn't Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me?
It's kind of a contrast between Jesus' healing and circumcision is cutting. And so there's an opposite thing, you know. Even it could be called, I think Paul refers to as something is harmful, but it's really, Jesus was doing something good and they were doing some cutting. I mean, it was
Right. And I guess the application that I take from that is that, you know, I have to be careful, as well as we all have to be careful in what we talk about, and we're not hypocrites in what we do. We have to understand what the law is and what do we do, and not judge somebody for something that is not even the situation there.
We also need to be careful not to offend people. In the opposite way, that we can be careful to offend people.
Like these folks were not even caring about that.
Yeah, the opposite way. Like in both senses, we need to be careful not to offend people, but we also need to be willing to offend people. I think it's both sides of it.
That's a good point. Boldness as well as humility. So the crowd answered, you have a demon? Who is seeking to kill you? So were they just kind of mocking him at that point? Yeah. Look, who's seeking to kill you? Or it could have been the folks in the crowd who didn't realize that it was the Jewish leaders as well. Right? They didn't realize that. They thought this guy was either a demon or, you know, something different. But the Jewish leaders were doing what? They were seeking to kill him. The crowd may not have known that. In verse 21 through 23, and it says, I did one work, and you all marveled at it. Moses gave you circumcision, and you circumcised the man on the Sabbath. Are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Now he was talking as well to the whole crowd, so he was more or less explaining the whole situation of why the leaders were going after him. And he was really exposing their inconsistencies of that circumcision, as we talked about, where on the Sabbath they thought it was acceptable, but healing, as you just talked about, Ken, was something that was condemned. Here they were cutting. There they were, you know, Jesus was healing. And there's a cross reference to that also in John 5 and 9, and also back in Matthew 12, where they talked about the same situation. You know, in some of the applications that I've read about this is, you know, true obedience to fulfill the spirit of the law and not rigid rules is kind of what, you know, that could also come into place. And I believe that was kind of what we were getting at back there. Go ahead.
And circumcision didn't start with Moses, it started with Abraham. So it wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. It was Abraham.
uh,
Yeah, but they seem to always go after Moses in regard to you know what they were moving towards. But you're absolutely right. So in verse 24, do not judge by appearance, but judge with right judgment. What do we take of that? First of all, I thought we weren't supposed to judge. That's what the world continues to throw at us in a lot of cases. In this case, you know, are we supposed to judge? Here it says that we're supposed to judge with what? With right judgment. Go ahead. I thought I saw you.
yeah, I mean, we all make judgments every single day of our lives. But if we're doing the same thing somebody else is doing and we're judging them, we have no right to judge them. But we know the difference. We judge in the fact that we realize who is committing sins, that person over there is stealing, so he needs to.
Well, I mean,
be
we also, very similar to what you're saying is the passage of the plank and the splinter in the eye, right? The same thing, or we will be judged in the same as we judge. You know, and I think this is the true area is here. Jesus calls for righteous judgment is the key, righteous judgment. And in this case, were they doing righteous judgment? No, absolutely not. They absolutely were not, and it's not based on God's word, but it's more or less surface appearances of what we think it looks like.
And we're taught that we know the word of God so we can discern right from wrong. The discernment is a type of judgment. I took a class in, I forget, in college, and a girl, it was, abortion was a big subject back then, and so he asked me, anybody here that's not prejudiced? And the girl next to me, she raised her hand. He says, you're not prejudiced? He said, no. He says, do you like people who are prejudiced? She said, no. You know, so
yeah. So you got her in a trap.
Yeah, hang on, I gotta get back on my mental track there. So the Pharisees, the Jews, the Jewish leaders, so even way before we had Pharisees, had made up all of these. They were very concerned about having a rule saying, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy, when they didn't have specifics about what that meant. So they came up with all these rules.
Mhm.
This is exactly how far you can go in a day. This is exactly what you can and can't do. And those were the standards they were holding everybody to. And that wasn't right judgment. That was judging by appearances. They saw Jesus healing people, said that looks like work. They were using their rules, not the rules God had given them.
So bring it right back on us. What do we need to be able to apply righteous judgment? What do we need to use?